welcome everybody to this session 6 of our international conference on values-driven and faith-driven investing, walk the talk, Africa-Europe focus. It's a long day that we already explore so many facets of how to improve and increase and encourage value-driven and faith-driven investing with a special focus on Africa. And I'm glad to have in this round 3 examples of cases, we could call it, of concrete investing in Africa on different levels. 2 of them are related to climate change, and it was since the morning, the opening session, clear that climate change is the biggest challenge that we have, even bigger most probably than COVID, where we all hope that it can be overcome in due time. But the climate change will be with us as a challenge as long as we live, if I may say. So that is something that is very key. But as key is the day-to-day on the ground needs and sufferings of people. And Grant will present the hand-in-hand group about affordable houses for low-income people. So you see, we are dealing with these different levels, and we are very glad to have these 3 cases with 4 people presenting, but we want to have it in a way that we have also enough time for Q&A. We will get the questions on the chat, and I will moderate then that in the second part. So I go straight to, and I welcome also Christophe Banefo, who is also speaking on the climate issue, CO2 conversion project of Oxygen. And so Grant Smith, you are working on the ground with a hand-in-hand group, Kenya, from the UK on affordable housing. Thank you for presenting what you are doing, and then also link it, of course, with the question of investments. If somebody wants to say, yes, I'm in real estate, can I invest in the huts in Kenya suburbs or slums, or is that not for me? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christophe. So yeah, I'm Grant, and I've been in construction all of my life. 22 years ago, 2 friends of mine asked me if I would form an NGO, a charity, to support poor communities. And I said no. I said, there's a lot of good NGO organizations, so why start another one? However, they took me to a project and introduced me to the project leader. And my heart was taken, basically, that I needed to make a response. 2 years later, I was then sitting in a tin shed in Dagoretti in Nairobi, where we were sponsoring 2 children through education. And as I sat in that tin shed, which they called their home, I thought to myself, one of the huge challenges in Kenya is that the people at the lower end get paid such pathetic wages. Can we actually create commercial employment that pays those at the bottom end a fairer wage? And that was the vision that I had 22 years ago. Very shortly after that, I met who has become my Kenyan business partner, and we set about to establish a business which were paying people a bit fairer. Roll on to today, and what we have moved into is construction in Kenya. And we have partnered Christian ministries that have prime land in Nairobi. We find investment, we construct their developments for them. So for an example, we have just done a development at the rear of Yaya Center for Church Mission Society. We built a 13-story building for them. We employed 150 people whilst we were doing the development, all paid above the basic wage. We created 16 apprenticeship programs and have generated $250,000 a year for CMS through rental income from the space that they don't occupy, but they rent out. In Kenya, there is a massive need for affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I'm talking about units in the range of $10,000 to $30,000. They reckon that new houses at that range need to be built, 200,000 new houses need to be built at that size every year. But of course, affordable gets confused with poor quality. I'm not talking about poor quality. I'm talking about quality houses, but at a lower specification, which are therefore affordable to lower income groups. In Kenya, there are only currently 26,000 mortgages. 86% of Kenyans work in the informal sector. What do I mean by that? They don't have a pay slip. So how can they borrow money? And therefore, to really get affordable houses into the hands of low income groups and the poorest in Kenya, actually the cost and investment into the development is only part of the challenge. The bigger part of the challenge is how you then finance end user finance. And one way that we believe that we can do that is to have a buy to let shared ownership concept. So that a person who is on a really low income, who doesn't have access to the banks, who doesn't have a pay slip to be able to get a mortgage or a loan, can actually go in and rent, and then we effectively share the asset growth in their development as they spend longer time in that apartment. This is one way we believe that we can get quality homes into some of the poorest people in Kenya. But in addition to that, often poor people have had a restricted education. And so therefore, instead of building stone structures that we're selling on or even renting on, we then like to partner with local faith groups who can then support the people that move into these communities in teaching life skills, in teaching finance management, in teaching how to bring up children, etc., etc. So we are priding ourselves that we aren't just building a house, but we're actually building communities for which we can then bring added value, so to speak, in helping to bring life skills and faith into their lives. Our first affordable housing project is in Embu. It's 220 units with a total development cost of $3 million, split down into 6 phases, which is about $500,000 per phase. We can find that finance in order to do the construction, but the bigger step challenge is the challenge to find the end user finance. We have access to so many sites in Kenya to do housing of this nature. And much has been said today about impact investing. Let me say what the impact of investment through a hand-in-hand group achieves. So we will build a quality, affordable house. We will pay our construction workers a fairer pay. And the way we do that is we pay them according to what they do rather than a day rate. And that allows a hard-working person to earn maybe double or treble the day rate. We will have apprenticeship programs for all the construction trades. And we are effectively paying school fees. How do we do that? Because so often construction workers would be people going to NGOs asking them to sponsor their children through school. But instead, commercially, we are employing them properly, paying them properly, so they can afford their own school fees. And we're structuring a rent to buy so that poor people are basically having access to an asset. And then in partnership with a local faith group, we can enhance both their environment and their life skills capacity. In Embu, the people that are working in the town will have to travel long distances, living in tin sheds out in the rural communities. We are therefore creating homes right in the center of the town, which are accessible and affordable. Earlier on today, somebody said to me, "Why do you do this?" Because it isn't easy. And basically what happened to me was 25 years ago, my family, I have 3 children, we were sponsoring a child from Rwanda Her name was Mujja. And as you are all probably aware of the atrocities that took place in Rwanda at that time, we were sending $20 a month to pay for her education and encouraging our children to pray for her. And when that happened in Rwanda, I stopped and I thought, what did Mujja do to deserve being brought up in Rwanda and now in such a state where she could possibly get killed? And what have my children done to deserve to be born into a structured country with free education, with a safe environment? And the answer to that question was absolutely nothing. And at that point, I realized that as a person of faith, I had a broader responsibility to share the resources that God had trusted me with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant, for your final confession, I would say, of your deeper motivation, and then for sharing this impressive, looks simple, but in fact is complicated and needs a long energy to sustain with your project. And we will see later that between the different sectors that we discuss in this conference, financing, agriculture, real estate, climate, there is a link and we can create a lot of synergies between that. Thank you so much. We come back to that in the discussion. I hand over to Christopher Banefo, CEO and initiator of an initiative called Oxyzen, coming from Nigeria, but living in the Geneva area, Switzerland, about CO2 conversion projects. And there are several initiatives, as we all know, about how to compensate CO2 emissions through the emitters. And what is a model that can really fly, because we all know that there are also some models that have been criticized, but this is now a model which is promising. Christopher, you have your 10 minutes of presentation. You have the floor. Unmute.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I much appreciate that. So as you indicated, I'm half Swiss, half Nigerian, half African, half European. So apart from being living proof that God has a sense of humor, my existence is also here to build a bridge between continents. So that's the opening statement, so to speak. We have an interesting situation in the sense that when we look at the challenges in the developing world, including Africa, Latin America, everywhere, and actually also in Europe, we have a situation where the rural population is leaving for the urban centers because they are essentially disenfranchised. They have no hope. They're disconnected from the financial system. They have no land titles, and thereby they cannot leverage. And so there's this drift from the rural areas to the urban centers, creating a lot of social challenges, security challenges. The growth and the development of the urban centers cannot keep pace with the inflow of human population coming in. And this also has the net effect of a decrease in food security, because it's the rural areas that are producing the food. And so we have this downward spiral that is going on. And the urban development is unable to keep up when we're looking at basic things like the provision of pipe-borne water, waste management, provision of energy. And so we need to focus and look at, what is actually going on. So on the other hand, the rural communities are the stakeholders and the owners of significant carbon sinks. So the question is, can these carbon sinks, the sequestration capacity of carbon, CO2, can that be monetized? And the answer is yes. To give an order of magnitude what we're talking about, the current global carbon market, as we speak today, is estimated at over 250 billion US dollars a year. If we assume that 50% of that carbon absorption is occurring in the global south, then we're talking of over $100 billion that would be a potential financial flow into the south, paid for by the emitters, the ones that are emitting CO2. And so the question is there a way of harnessing this? And the answer is then, fine, let's go back to the other side of the equation and ask the emitters, what do they want to be able to do? Because right now, the emitters are faced with multiple metrics of measurement of carbon sequestration. They are being asked to pay 30, 40% upfront in the form of fees to the service providers of carbon credits. At the same time, when you go to the other side of the equation and you ask the stakeholders of carbon sinks, are they receiving any proceeds? The answer is the most of them will say, no, we're not receiving any proceeds. And so the question is, what's happening to this capital flow? It's not going to where we think it should be going. And so we have developed, or we are developing, a platform using blockchain technology that does what? It allows a CO2 emitter to get onto the platform, identify the converters, the owners, the stakeholders, and the owners of carbon sinks. You can see the capacity of carbon sequestration based on a scientific metric that we are employing, the only metric that is being employed on a scientific basis using satellite technology and all that, to get the assessment and the quantification of the carbon sequestration capacity of any given carbon sink that is on the platform, both terrestrial and marine. Secondly, as an emitter, I may want to know what are the use of funds. First of all, who is the stakeholder? Who are the owners? And what are they doing with the funds? And am I able to link those funds to the Sustainable Development Goals? And if yes, then I have something that I may be able to leverage onto my marketing and get a return on investment based on that. And if we can do all that and enable the value transfer between emitter and converter in an efficient, immediate, point-to-point transaction with no third parties, no banks, no credit card companies, etc., then I think we have a winner. And looking again at the $250 billion on trade volume, if we get, sake of argument, 1% of the market, we're talking of a trade volume on the platform of over $2 billion. So that's the magnitude of the opportunity. As a practical example, we have a program called OES, which stands for Oxygen Youth Education Solution. That program is quite unique, and I'll share it with you. It starts with the kindergarten children. The 5-year-olds, the first 2 weeks in school, or the first week in school, every child, for example, plants 3 trees. Those trees are registered in the name of the child. They become part of an afforestation program. As the trees grow, they absorb carbon. It can be assessed, quantified, monetized through the platform. End result, the first tree finances the primary school education of the child. The first and second tree combined finances the secondary school education. The first, second, and the third tree combined finances the tertiary stroke vocational training of the child. So with that, you now have a series of benefits. One, or effects. One, every child becomes the protector of their own trees. The parents of the children become the protector of the trees of their children. You affect the microclimate. You affect biodiversity. And all of a sudden, you start having other domino effects. The community will look for the resources needed to protect those trees. In other words, alternative sources of energy, etc. And all of a sudden, things start to move. And so we now have a situation where, for example,
1 minute left.
Yep, the African churches, for example, faith communities in the global south could now harness the carbon sinks that they have, which can then be used to absorb the emissions of the faith communities in the northern half of the planet, and where they can now be a transactional relationship resulting in the empowerment of the communities and the stakeholders. So in a nutshell, that's what it's all about. Happy to
Thank you
go
so
into
much,
the Q&A.
Christopher. Yeah, we will come back in the discussion. As I'm involved in some of the discussions with Oxyzen, you may then also be able to take just a concrete example. For example, in Kenya, some of the landowners or forest owners or national parks, they already did the whole homework so that they would be ready for emitters to join hands and to have a mutual benefit. So you will say more than maybe in the discussion. Yes, we come to the third example, and also on the climate issue, and a very interesting, also innovative initiative called One Climate Fund. And Ulrich Möller is not only a church leader in Germany, he is also a manager and really understands a lot about these climate issues. And your colleague Arumugam Pillay, as the Africa representative of it, you share the task. You have the floor.
Thank you very much.
I can add, Ulrich was also involved in the last conferences of physical, and now we do it online. Ulrich, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear Christoph, ladies and gentlemen, we are very grateful for this opportunity to share with you the experiences about the One Climate Fund and the One Climate Association in the past year. The theme this year is aptly branded Walk the Talk, which certainly means we must support investment that align with international climate conventions, but more importantly, take a bold and visionary step by investing in initiatives that are designed to deal with the social, economic, and environmental transformation in Africa. Not all of us have been part of the last faith-based investment conference, 2020. Therefore, I provide briefly a background of where we come from, the focus of the key challenges, lesson learned, and then the road ahead together with Morgan. 2016, the International Non-Profit Association One for the Climate has been initiated by church leaders, representatives of high-profile sustainability institutes, and financial experts from Germany, India, Southern Africa, and Eastern Africa. Its purpose is together in new partnerships to make a difference for climate justice in the framework of COP21 and SDGs. Slide 2 now explains the complexity of challenges of impact financing and shows the partnership model for Africa. It poses the deep question, which investor is going to come forward to address these deep needs? The slides also highlights salient challenges that are addressed later in our presentation. The One Climate Association connects people around the world to take community action on climate justice through investments in renewable energy. Projects have started to create jobs and alleviate people from energy poverty in areas most affected by climate change. So what have we achieved thus far in 2020? On the positive side, in 2021, the establishment of an international One Climate cooperative under Dutch law will be registered. Its primary goal will be to mobilize funding on proportional basis for development in Europe and Africa to advance the use of solar and wind power. The intention is that subsidiary cooperatives will be established in some countries, while in South Africa, the One Climate Fund will be the conduit through which the rent to buy product will be rolled out. The One Climate Fund Southern Africa, established 2017, achieved mixed results last years. For those that were here last year, I repeat, the fund is a highly specialized instrument crafted to meet the transformation and development and economic imperatives of Southern Africa, which is to 85% reliant on coal for national energy. To accomplish this goal, a pipeline of carefully selected renewable energy sector projects, namely in wind and solar energy, has been assembled. Increasingly, the South African government is placing huge emphasis on the use of locally manufactured equipment and components. Therefore, this plays a central role in selection of investments. The fund focuses on smaller projects, less than 5 megawatts, where market failure is imminent. The fund has special lending programs designed to provide funds to Southern African registered companies involved in manufacture of renewable energy components, assembly of renewable energy components into intermediate products, installation and maintenance of renewable energy projects in homes, constructions of independent power production plants by private companies and municipalities, and retail lending for installation and sale of renewable energy products. Our progress has been mixed with some disappointment and some good lessons learned. Slide 3 illustrates the multifaceted journey we have traveled with relative success and points to the single most important challenge we still have to overcome: mobilization of funding. Since my last presentation 1 year ago, the fund has made some progress. We are now a licensed credit provider under the national credit law in South Africa. Secondly, we engaged with the Namibian government and were referred to the Namibian pension funds, where we have firmly established an advisory and co-funding relationship on future projects. Last year, I reported that the Climate Fund was one of the very few of more than 100 submissions that succeeded through the procurement process of the South African Public Investment Corporation, PIC. We were excited about the prospect of investment funding that met their criteria entirely for a startup transformative initiative. Unfortunately, during December 2020, we were informed that they will not continue with our transaction further because of the following 3 reasons. A, the risk profile of 2 of our market segments, informal settlements and investments in projects where municipalities are involved. B, the proposed investment funding model, 50% from Germany and 50% from South Africa, is one they are not yet familiar with, and this structure is not yet in line with their pension fund investment guidelines. The fact that we are a startup, which is not backed up by an established fund manager, is of course also not encouraging, but that is the nature of startups. To deepen this further, that we have a disappointing result with the first large funding approach, but not our last, and that we have learned significant lessons. I give over now for deepening it to Morgan Pillay.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Morgan?
Mike, yeah.
Yeah. Greetings, colleagues. Greetings to the moderator, colleagues from the finance and faith-based sectors. Before we get into the lessons learned and the way forward, I would like to articulate the challenges that we experienced in 2020 as a fledgling fund manager. In slide 4, you can see the economic conditions under which we were approaching funders, and significant changes in particularly the South African economy is prevalent. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the emerging market economies. The prolonged acquisition and access of a vaccine that will provide some immunity in the medium term has really negatively impacted the investment volume and decisions. African governments in general have reprioritized those budgets to fight the pandemic, and many have provided relief to the most vulnerable in their society. Withdrawal from the climate adaptation and mitigation projects is visibly noted. Banks have become extremely cautious and are sticking to traditional businesses and established relationships. In the meantime, many Africans have lost their livelihoods and are unable to afford rentals and mortgage payments, and many are left to the mercy of friends and family and relief efforts. Our challenge, and that of many other institutions in South Africa, is funding at wholesale level that remains constrained. And here I'm referring to patient capital and equity. This is virtually non-existent. On the opportunity side, we are facing demonstrated demand for funding for new projects, requiring funding for retail institutions that require expansion finance at the retail level. This demand has now grown exponentially and continues to grow. In addition, very few projects have commenced because of the lack of funding. This market failure has had a dampening impact in new renewable energy projects, which could mitigate against climate change. Similarly, we have noticed that the response from government has been slow and non-responsive. These are certainly factors that still positions our company in a market where there is great need for our services and products. So what have we learned in the past year? We have learned that there is strong support and show for our mandate and mission. However, there are contradictory criteria or risk averseness, in particularly market segments we try to serve from investors and funders. Wholesale funders clearly indicate that they neither have the capacity nor the capability to service this market. Therefore, the role of the One Climate Fund is critically a missionary role to play to demonstrate that intermediation can successfully occur in this market on a sustainable basis. As a startup fund manager, a capacity or support agreement with an established fund manager is necessary arrangement for risk transfer, knowledge, and compliance with the Pension Fund Acts. The strategy and financing model must include flexibility to be calibrated to accommodate COVID-type events. An anchor investor is a key to opening the door to both development finance institutions and commercial banks, both locally and abroad. Initiatives like the One Climate Cooperative, through its citizenry-based funding model, is more likely to provide the basic kickstart for our operations. The crisis in South Africa, fossil-based energy supplies continues, and opportunity for renewable energy is huge. Despite these trends, our recent track record is set back, and our resolve is to continue making submissions to the Development Bank of Southern Africa and international investors and banks with the aim of showing that we have a unique value proposition. Slide number 7 indicates this revised strategy in respect of funding mobilization and relationship with funders. We can intermediate in markets where they are unable to penetrate. We have local knowledge, hands-on approach, practical experience with these markets. We have a pipeline of projects and investments. We can deliver on economic, social, and environmental goals. Finally, we will pursue our relationship with the International One Climate Cooperative to create this necessary track record. Over to you, Ulrich.
In concluding, I come back to our opening statement on Walk the Talk. Faith-based investors must be leading the charge in the newly found class of assets. We must disrupt the current patterns of investment from those that have responsibility to those that have capacity and capability. The role of anchor investors need to be the catalyst of an emerging new sustainable reality for all. This shift can provide the necessary impetus that can change livelihoods, drive emissions down, improve access to energy. 2 of 3 people in Africa have poor access to energy, and deliver a financial return. We are looking forward towards your reactions and responses on our presentation, and we appreciate your interest and commitment to further explore how together we can walk the talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ulrich and Arumugam. It's a great setting of this panel with the down-to-earth housing low-income and low-cost housing of grant, and then the two climate initiatives, which are different, but of course with the same goal, to use market mechanisms somehow, investments, and between emitters and converters, a market mechanism which can be scaled up also on a larger level. And with that, we open the discussion. But I would like to add one remark. I think these three presentations show the dependency on the market and the chances of the markets, but also the volatility that every investor suffers in this current situation. In the morning, we heard Anis Askar saying, yeah, I mean, investors are all somehow do not know what will be next. And at the same time, this opens large opportunities because traditional investment with zero interest or negative interest is not an option anymore for many. So I think we need to see it also as an opportunity right now. But what we observe, and I heard it also from the three presentations, is how to build trust in faith communities, in actors, in converters. Yeah, this is a local community somewhere in a rural area. That's my cup of tea, not my cup of tea to invest. These are poor people who have even not an income statement. How can I deal with that? This is a church which is known for abusing money by some church managers. So you know all these mistrusts. So how to identify the credible partners for this type of investments? I think that is one of the issues we should address, and one of the questions I have to all the three of you. How did you build trust, or you are on the way to build trust in order to say to investors, look, if you invest in our initiative, it is as safe as if you invest in the Wall Street or in other instruments. And that is a key issue. Maybe we start just with that, and then we come to some comments or questions from the chat. Who wants to comment on that question? What do you do to say we are as credible as other, or maybe more credible, for safeguarding your capital and doing positive impact at the same time? Grant.
Yeah, Christoph, I mean, it is such a significant question, because I actually believe that there are so many people and there is so much money out there that is available, but people don't know who to trust. And you get people like me who do a very good sales pitch and think, is he really trustworthy? Is he doing what he says on the tin? And the reality is that trust, in my experience and my view, only comes as a consequence of time and people interacting with you and knowing that you do actually do what you say you're going to do. You can't actually achieve that in a sales pitch. So it only comes from your references or from the longevity of staying in a particular market, that therefore gives you that credibility that hand in hand have done what they said they would do, as opposed to, will you actually do what you said you're going to do?
Thank you very much. Yes, Arumugam, you are in the place. Yes. You are the fund manager. You have to convince people that you are trustworthy, huh?
Absolutely. I think there are 2 points to be made. One, at the financial level, I think it's important to be able to demonstrate that your initiative can generate the type of returns that your investors are looking for. Secondly, to provide the impact that is required to keep them interested and involved in the project. And I think the second point, I think it's about the communities. And what we've seen, particularly on the African continent, is that if communities are not involved in making critical decisions about the project, this creates a huge level of distrust. And successful projects have this ingredient in it. And it's about the real impact on people's livelihoods, how have people's lives improved over the long haul in let's say, in the investment environment. And I agree with Grant. You cannot do this on a short term. You have to be involved on the long term, and you have to be consistently out there doing these things consistently and showing that you have the ability and the capability, and most of all, responsible when things do go wrong, to go in there and rectify it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher.
There are three questions that I think are fundamental when you are engaging with either investors or with the user. The questions are how, what, and why. So we're very quick to address the how and the what. What are we doing and how are we doing it? But if you want to resonate with your counterpart, then you also have to convince that person as to the why you're doing something. And if you can resonate on the why, then you can build a bridge. As long as you only talk of how and what, without being able to leverage on the why, then there's always a big question mark there. And so in our case with the how and what, we put on the hat of the investor. 99% of the investors happen to be carbon emitters by default. And so they are looking at, in the Northern Hemisphere, in certain countries, you're charged with a carbon tax, or you have to, through legislation, you have to reduce your carbon footprint, which you can only do effectively if you also incorporate parts of your strategy to involve a carbon offset. And if it is a carbon offset, you have a big challenge, because all the solutions out there or ability to use carbon offsets raise a whole series of questions. And that's where we come in and say, looking at all the issues we have currently in the carbon trade market, we are able to surgically address each of those problems to show a solution proposition that is truly superior. And so the how and what we can very easily address. Now, if we now come in with the why, and we can link that to specific, added value that makes sense for their children, that is long-term benefit to the common good, that is basically how we've been able to bridge the gap, which we are also in the process of doing. So this is, in a nutshell, I think, what one has to do.
Thank you, Ulrich.
Yeah, I fully agree to Christopher that you always have to start with the why, and if you don't do that right, your purpose is gone. At the same time, when you start with the why and try to then make proposals and building trust relationship with people you want to cooperate with, you discover that when it comes to finances, this trust building is also depending on the question, do you have a track record or not? And only those who are really ready to go high risk as first step investors, they might be ready to say, yes, your why is so strong and I'm so much convinced, I'll take this risk. And that, of course, is the problem which we also are coping with. And therefore, the question is, how do you find multiple routes which might be complementary and not just a one-way shot to build that trust by also building track record? And that is, for example, in our case, why we now, in this cooperation with one international, one climate cooperation, we will not only go for the big investor, but also cooperate with constituencies who have a more limited outreach financially, but are very much committed and together in a big network are also able to make a big difference. and then also at the same time to be more flexible, as Morgan explained, to deal with contradictory criteria of different stakeholders, which are important there. But to do that and to be able to do that in a trustful way for others, you must be very consistent with your vision and with different instruments and how they relate to each other. Otherwise, you lose your focus.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Saskun Radye. An attendee, a participant asked if the focus is only on South Africa or also in places such as Zimbabwe, Angola, and Mozambique. I think that's a question to One Climate, Arumugam. And then maybe we can also add the question to Grant. You're focused on Kenya or beyond. Arumugam?
Thank you. Our initial plan is to establish ourselves firmly in South Africa. We have a strong relationship with the Namibian government and the pension fund, and hopefully that would be the starting point. And once we have that under our belt and firmly, managing the investments, certainly we will expand to the rest of the continent. That's our long-term strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And Grant?
Yeah, so for me, I've been moving in Kenya for 22 years. I have a Kenyan business partner for 20 years who I completely trust. We have a network of engineers, quantity surveyors, architects, etc., who we completely trust. And we have a navigational process through corruption. Now, what do I mean by that? Is basically we've learned over a period of time of how to handle things without having to pay bribes. And I can tell you today, a lot of people will say, do you have to pay a bribe in order to work in Kenya? And I can tell you that my experience this far is I've never paid a bribe. I've never sanctioned a bribe. And probably what is more of a testimony is I've never been offered a bribe, and I'm giving out contracts all the time. So what do I mean by the way that we've navigated our way through? Well, basically, for want of a better term, clean people know clean people. And therefore, when you come up against government organizations, because of the network of structure of clean people that we work with, we can navigate through in a clean way. But it's taken me 22 years to achieve that. So for me to now go to Zimbabwe, I would be 70, 80 in order to achieve that again. So I'm sticking to Kenya.
Thank you so much. And also you said there is still huge work to do, 200,000 units ahead of you to build. And Christopher, you are just on the geography. You are working internationally, including different parts of Africa. Just one word about that.
Yes, so far we have over 18 million hectares of terrestrial carbon sinks already signed up with us. The geographic spread is predominantly within Africa, East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania. We are engaged with DRC in certain West African carbon sinks. We're also having discussions with some very interesting carbon sinks in Southern Africa, particularly South Africa, Mozambique, including Angola. So let's call it the SADC region. We just signed up converters in Latin America. There's an association of 9 indigenous communities in Honduras. The Coffee Growing Association in Guatemala is also thinking about coming on board. This is together with a program we are having conversations with Nespresso as an emitter on the other side. North America, Canada is also some of the stakeholders there are also coming on board. So it's kind of growing, there's movement in, Asia and some of the South Pacific islands. There's also communications there. And just as an update, 2 days ago, we had a very interesting conversations with a delegation from Bhutan. And I just received this morning the geo coordinates of a significant amount of carbon sinks that Bhutan as a country would like to also, leverage on. So it's very interesting, in other words.
Thank you very much. This shows also, if I may make a link to a former session on investments, loans, interest rates, where there was a signal there from the investor side that they need more and more data. Everything has to be data-based. Otherwise, it's not credible or not investable. So this struggle for data. And then we know, on the other hand, that a number of communities are not, don't have the data. They even don't know who is the owner of the land in terms of a written paper. And now you, Christopher, you work with satellite data in order to have, so to say, a view of emissions independent from individual measuring, but then you need the trust into ETH, the university in Zurich, the technical university who has to provide the data. Why should we trust more the satellite analysis and AI of a university in Switzerland than the indigenous in Kenya or in Honduras? So these are questions about how to handle and the role of data. Can you say something about, from your experience in these different projects? Or would you say, no, it's not, it's extra traded, it's not as important as investors would say? Or would you say, no, that's the core issue today? Without data, you cannot attract any investor. What is your view?
Well, it's interesting because one of the key things is when we engage with a converter, a community, a landowner or stakeholders that claim that they are the owners of a particular piece of land, that has to be confirmed. And we do that using independent, basic auditors. Now, the question is, how do you define land ownership? Is it centrally registered, etc.? So I will use an example of Lesotho. We had an interesting situation where there's a particular wetland in Lesotho that was identified as an interesting carbon sink. By the time we engaged with the communities, there were 3 communities that border the wetland, which nobody owns. So the question is, how do you handle that? And so the answer that we gave is to utilize the traditional methodology of the communities who agree that nobody technically owns the wetland, but that they are beneficiaries and that they are custodians of the wetland for future generations. And so by using indigenous wisdom, based on Ubuntu, the principles of Ubuntu in Southern Africa, we can arrive at a consensus that the benefits of the wetlands will be shared. And so this is effectively where we arrived at in the example of Lesotho. And then once the perimeter, the geo coordinates have been established, which are agreed to through the consensus mechanism, only then do we use those geo coordinates for the establishment of the actual satellite data. Only then do we use the satellite algorithms. And so each...
Thank you.
That's just an example.
Thank you very much. We cannot give everybody the floor now because time is running, and in 4 minutes we already start the closing session. If there is not a very urgent one remark, I would like to close here. And thank you all. It's very fascinating, your approach, and it's really not just the theory. You are living these projects with all the difficulties we have heard in South Africa, the positive side, but also the difficult side in these Corona times, which is very challenging. But we keep in touch, and we should benefit from this network in this conference to further expand and strengthen our cooperation. So I'm sure also between the three projects, between you but the others in this day, we can further build up this house of global cooperation. Thank you so much, and stay with us for the closing remarks, which starts in 4 minutes. Thank you.